Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Eva Wazan. I'm the Honorary Consul of Hungary, and you're here at the consulate. It is my pleasure to welcome you all, also those who are watching online, quite a few. It is part of our mission to support the young talent, young technical, especially Hungarians. And tonight, we're very happy to welcome two members of the Hungarian Innovators, Zoltán Egyed, who is the president, and Csaba Halász. So enjoy and welcome.
Hi, my name is Zoltán Egyed. Welcome to our event organized by the Hungarian Innovators Club of Silicon Valley. We are a non-political association of people involved in innovation. You can visit our website at hungariansv.com. Our speaker today is Csaba Halász, he's a product manager at Meta. He will be speaking about product management, why it matters, why it's so impactful, and how to do it right. Please help me to welcome Csaba Halász.
Thank you, Zoltán. Thank you, Eva. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Csaba Halász, and I've been a product manager for more than 15 years. Right now, I am at Meta. Some people still know it by Facebook. When I joined, it was still called Facebook. I've been there. I studied there for about 6.5 years at this point. And then before that, I've worked in various companies in the same role, product management. I also had a startup. I was a co-founder where we built a marketplace. So that's another time, another story. Happy to chat about that too. Today, we would like to go a little bit deeper about what product management is. I'm gonna qualify before even we go deep here is that we are talking about technical product management here. Product manager. Is it working, Zoltán?
Yeah, there was just a glitch in the network. Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So the role of the product manager, then we're going to talk a little bit about how product managers think and what's the approach. And then we'll open up for Q&A. The role of the product manager is like what we do, which is important. But the second one, the approach is like the how, which is probably even more important. And then we can go in Q&A in even more details in some of the intricacies and what separates a good product manager from a not so good one, and what are some of the everyday challenges we are facing. So with that, let's look at a real life example. Please be quiet because the voice and the volume is not as strong. So I'm gonna let it run.
Right.
As promised.
Nice board. Where's the rest?
Threat. This is all.
I asked for 50 computers. That's keyboards, cases, monitors, and power included, not just boards.
Just boards. Excuse me, just boards. These are state of the art. The logic boards alone are. Nobody's making anything like this. They're what? How dare you? How dare you?
I think what my colleague is saying is that you're not seeing the possibilities here. That is indeed one unbelievably kick-ass computer.
Not to the consumer.
Well, then maybe your consumer should start to learn how to operate, how to even work that.
Listen, boys, you sold me on a home computer. That's a keyboard and monitor. This is a board. Now, I'm sure this makes a very capable starter kit, but the everyday person, the kind of person that's not an engineer or in a computer club like you, they're not going to know what the hell this is. The average Joe doesn't want to build their own computer. They just want to buy it. They want to take it out of the box, plug it in, and have it work. Steve, are you listening to me?
Yeah. These are your boards. And they will sell. I can promise you that. You saw our demo at Homebrew. You know what it's capable of with the right components, which, by the way, all of which you sell. So demo it to the consumer and market the components separately. You show them your keyboards and your monitors. You'll move more inventory that way, and you'll make a hell of a lot more cash. You got me.
All right, Steve. I'll try to sell them. But if I don't, I'm not making another order.
Okay, that's fine. But I think that you might be really interested in our second model.
What's the second model?
What are you talking about? All in one.
All right. So as it's written there, and you might recognize him, he is one of the biggest product managers ever lived, Steve Jobs. He was way more than a product manager, by the way, but he was that too. I think this video is one of the most complete example of what a product manager does. It captures so many parts of product management. So we're going to go through that in a second, but I'm going to ask a simple question from the audience here. No trick here. Why are they arguing? By the way, the shopkeeper is Paul Terrell. So what is Paul and Steve Jobs arguing about? It's a simple question.
Consumer readiness of the products.
It's there. So basically what the consumer wants,
Product market
whether
fit.
they are going to buy what Steve and team produced or not. In other words, they had a fundamental disagreement on the need of the customer. So that's number one, basically point in every product manager's life to understand what the customer wants, and we're going to go deeper in that. The second piece, what was pretty interesting here, is that Steve didn't get phased at all. He didn't lose his coolness. There is another guy there who kind of works himself up. He's Wozniak. But a good product manager has great communication skills. So that's number two. Number three, when Steve starts walking out, he drops a sentence. Not sure if you guys remember. We have another product. So basically, he is selling already, and that's the third really important characteristic of PM. You always have to think about how to grow your product, either by selling in person or scaling it online, but you need to sell it. So those are three really, really important things. And I left the last one, which is also extremely important. They had a fundamental thought on like what the customer, fundamentally disagreement what the customer wants now, but also looking in the future. Steve mentioned that the customer will want to buy this, and he had a vision. So that's another thing. Product managers build vision. So those four things. By the way, this example is not accurate in this movie. So just I'm opening a little parenthesis here. Steve did pitch to Paul a fully assembled computer with keyboards and monitor and everything. Then, it's not shown here, they went back with a circuit board which only had a CPU and a keyboard input, but they didn't have a video output. So you couldn't even hook it up to a monitor. At that point, Paul sent them back and then asked them to build a full-fledged computer with a case and monitor and keyboard. And then Steve and Tim came back with this motherboard, which is still not a fully built computer. But at that point, they sealed the deal, and their second computer already then had a case around it and the monitor and all those things. So just a little bit of history, parenthesis closed. So going back to the product management, I kind of went through some of the key aspects and the key tasks a product manager does, but let's go a little bit deeper in those. So before we go, actually, what is product management? Like, product management is the process of building products and then launching and improving them. It's very important, though, that you just don't build products for fun. I mean, that's part of it, too. but you want to meet the customer's needs, and the third layer is basically you want to meet the business goals. So ideally, at some point, you want to generate some benefits, which most often in companies' lives, unless you're a nonprofit, is money. So you want to generate money. So it's very important. You build product in order for that the customer, you serve the customer's need, and then you generate money for your own company. Now, the product manager comes into the picture. The product managers basically do, on a high level, very high level, they set the vision, the strategy, and then execute on that. But it's also extremely important that product managers are basically a bridge or the glue, if you want to look at it that way, across business, technology, and user experience. Very often, customers have in mind certain characteristics of the product, which is more about the aesthetics or the user flow. So that's the UX, the UI piece. Obviously, there is technology, so you are working with engineers, and you need to basically translate the customer's need to technology. And then business, we mentioned that you at some point want to generate some metrics, which could be growth, but eventually is probably monetary. The main role of product management can be summarized in 5 areas. First and foremost, you understand the user, then you own the strategy and the vision, you prioritize and execute on that vision, and then you communicate, and then you drive product success. So let's go a little bit in more detail. So you need to, product managers have deep empathy and deep understanding about what the customer needs. And to the level what you also saw in the video, by the way, that they want keyboard, they want a monitor, but probably even deeper than that. What type of keyboard, what type of monitor, what speed, all those things. So you want to have a deep understanding. Then the other one is the customer needs changes. So after they start using your product, a couple of things happen. A, the product's not so great. I will say another word, but so maybe it's not so great. Then you want to iterate and you want to understand what's wrong. The other feedback could be that the customer's needs change for different reasons. Either competition comes out or basically technology advances. But long story short, the customer's feedback is extremely important, and the customer need is constantly changing. So you have to be in tune with that. We talked about the vision and the strategy a little bit earlier, but you, as a product manager, you create product goals, and then you align those with business objectives. Then you ensure that the team is building toward this shared vision. I'll stop there for a second. Oftentimes it happens that a few team members, mostly engineering and product management, have a vision in their head, but they don't share that with the rest of the team. In those occasions, the team is kind of in the dark about what we are doing. And so you need to bring the entire team along with that vision, and you have to have a coherent communication around that vision so that everyone understands and basically rows together to achieve that vision. And think strategically, and then you also need to define a long-term roadmap. We're going to talk a little bit more in the second part of this presentation. Then when you have a strategy, then another hard part comes. You need to prioritize the ideas. Usually, you can, the strategy is like the vision is where you want to be. The strategy is how you get there. However, the how you get there and what exactly are the small milestones and what exactly you build on that path could be defined in infinite number of ways, almost like so many ways. So you need to prioritize what you build first, what you build second. You need to basically ensure that the resources you have are all mapped up with basically what you are trying to achieve. So prioritization is key. Then you have to clarify the requirements, and that is mostly for your engineering team. And finally, you need to collaborate with your team to execute on the strategy and on the roadmap. We talked about communication. Steve Jobs was amazing in the video. He didn't start yelling. We don't yell during, usually, most companies, you don't yell. But even then, there are different ways to communicate. Good product managers can articulate their view in a very clear and succinct way. That's number one. Number two, as a product manager, you have a role to create a shared understanding. And you build that shared understanding through communication verbally, but most often in writing. It's very often happens that different parts of your team, data science, engineering, design, they kind of understand what they need to do, but they understand it a little bit differently. So they all run away and start doing their things if basically the product is not set up properly. And then the outcome, what they come back, it's different. It's not matching what basically we as an entire team would like to be. So it's very important from the get-go and throughout the entire project to build this shared understanding and constantly keep everyone on the same level of understanding in the team, so that whatever they are working on, and most importantly, the outcome meets the needs. You drive product success. So after you build the product, you launch it, and then basically you define metrics to measure the product success. You are tracking that, and then basically you get the feedback as you described, so that basically you can iterate on the product. I think that's pretty much my part, and I transfer it over to Zoltan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Imagine that you are a product manager in the late 19th century and you are tasked with improving transportation in some big growing cities. People tell you that these horses are terrible, the current horses. They are slow, they take sort of money to keep them alive, they require constant care, feeding, shoeing, they leave waste everywhere, and managing large stables is actually quite a logistical problem. So based on these issues, your product team might focus on intensely just build a better horse. So you invest heavily into breeding programs, you develop improved saddles, you create better harnesses, create long distance horseshoes. And you create some horses which are slightly faster, slightly easier to manage. You might even invent a performance feed. So with that one, your team is diligently solving a problem of making horses better, and they execute brilliantly on that particular problem. Based on that, you launch Horse version 2.0. And it represents your level of innovation, and they require a little bit less care than the usual horses, and they incrementally make people's job a little bit better in how they travel in the big cities. These brilliant improvements in Horse 2.0 are soon overshadowed by a completely different solution. Realize that the true underlying need is not necessarily a better horse. It was for a faster, cleaner, more scalable, more convenient, less labor-intensive transportation between different points for people and for some other goods. The complaints about the horses was just a symptom about that current solution. And in that sense, a particular solution to that problem was obviously the automobile, which did not improve the horse at all. It solved the actual need in a totally different way, actually in a more efficient and scalable way by introducing an absolutely different paradigm. So why is this actually important to think about when you think about product management? If you don't figure out correctly what the real problem is, it leads to a whole lot of wasted resources. In your case, your bidding programs and all the other things, which are going to be very close to pointless at the end. It also means, obviously, a huge amount of missed opportunity. You will totally miss out on a probably much larger market than previously the horse market was. You will have no real impact. And you will also face an erosion of trust from your customers. You need to understand that users often express their frustrations, their needs in terms of their existing solutions and in their immediate symptoms, such as I need a faster horse, or this app is too slow, or I need more storage, or I need faster computers. It is the absolute imperative of the product manager to look beyond these surface level statements and to really drive deeper into research, interviews, and better understanding of the particular job that customer is trying to be doing. And with that one, to try to find a problem which, if they can solve, it can really truly make a difference. A brilliant solution to the wrong problem is still a huge failure. So let me actually go about these solutions. One of the often counterintuitive aspects of this job is really have to start to love structured thinking. And especially for Hungarians, it might sound like, but you want to put my creativity into a small little box and I should be following those rules. It's not quite that way. Why do we need that structured thinking? Unstructured thinking often leads to a lot of guesswork, conflicting opinions, and wasted effort. For sake of argument, imagine that you are a PM for some collaboration tool. Everyone has used collaboration tools. Some core feature launched months ago, and let's call it a team projects. And it was designed to be the central hub for the whole team, and it's technically sound, but the adoption and the real actual engagement is just kind of low. Users might start a project, but somehow they don't quite get it working. And you need to understand what's happening here. And most people, or actually at least a lot of people, would try to make some guesswork what the issue might be. They might try kind of spaghetti approach, and the engineer might say, oh, maybe it's buggy on some browsers. A designer might say, this UI is too cluttered and it's hard to find the task assignments. Marketing might say, we just need to kind of advertise it enough. We just need to have a bigger budget for advertising and everything is going to be fine. Sales might say that our users get confused and they ask the support team how to use it. And the product owner might say, maybe that feature is not actually quite useful. Everyone has a guess. Which one is true, which one is closer? It's very hard to say. There is no clear path of how to investigate the problem. And it's also very hard to communicate when you think about and try to solve a problem. On the other hand, if you use a bit more structured thinking, you might say, okay, the problem is low engagement in this particular team project thing. In that case, I would strongly advocate to use a system such as what's called a MISI, which is an abbreviation for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, which means you try to chop up that issue into multiple parts such that they don't overlap, and together they, as far as you understand, they cover the whole thing. It's really that's all there is behind it. It's in that sense deceptively simple, but the more you get used to think about it in these terms, it will make your life probably 10 times better. So using that framework, one potential breakdown on this issue would be, well, maybe in one part, maybe it's about user awareness and understanding, or some access and initial setup issues, or some core user experience, or some motivation and reinforcement, or some user segment fit. And these are separate parts, and they all can have their own separate kind of MISI cutting out to little pieces inside them. Now you have a structure. You can have different people to try to verify different parts of what the actual issue might be. Somebody might come and say, oh, but you actually forgot this little piece here, which is somehow missing. It's not quite missing yet. We need to think about this part. That's the other part that it's super useful to have that structure. It's so much easier to realize if you are totally missing some substantial area there. And it also makes communicating the end results so much easier. Your job is not just to figure out what the issue is. Your job is not just to figure out what the customer wants. You have to communicate that in a way which makes it understandable and believable for other people. In some situations, when you are brought into new projects, it might even be possible that some original stakeholders, they might even wish that you fail there, and they just don't trust you how well you're doing your job. You have to show them the system you are using. You have to show them what data you are depending on. And this kind of structure gives you a wonderful way to show them, I'm not just making things up. This is logically what we are looking at. If we are missing something, please let us know. These are our solved parts of the results. And because of that, this is what the result is to be. It makes your communication at least 5 times more effective, if not more. So this example, why it uses structured way of thinking about the problem, and we don't want to use some structured communication, it enables a logical, systematic analysis. It helps you to create a roadmap for investigation, preventing random guesswork, and ensuring that all major potential areas are considered. It also helps you in handling complex systems. I don't know about you, myself, I have a problem envisioning more than 6 dimensions. So if you have some real complicating system, it really makes it so much easier to really understand it piece by piece. And it, again, helps you better to communicate the results. So in a sense, this structured thinking such as MISI, and there are a couple of other kinds, helps transform a confusing, multifaceted problem from a tangled mess of chaos into an issue which can be systematically analyzed and clearly explained. So how do you go from what you are seeing in such a structured way? How do you go from what you like to call hypothesis? Hypothesis is a big fancy word. All it means, there might be something working this way, or this might be a right kind of solution for that. How do you go from that chaos into clarity? One of the usual ways, which especially in this culture, people use to come up with new ideas, new hypotheses, is brainstorming. And we have been told different ideas about how brainstorming works. Oftentimes it is presented that just come out with all of the ideas you can have in your head, don't have any filter, just put them into a big hypothetical bucket, and then you're just going to filter it later on. That's garbage. That doesn't work. It's extremely ineffective. It might give you some good feelings, and also you will come up with some total nonsense, but it doesn't work. Brainstorming should be a way to come up with a structured, prioritized set of hypotheses. And in that sense, when you think of brainstorming, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody asks you, let's do a brainstorming for. Anytime you need to create a list, come up with possibilities why something might be happening one way or another, it's a kind of brainstorming. At that time, if you have the discipline and experience to be able to do that in a more structured way, your results will be probably at least 10 times better, possibly more. In that kind of brainstorming, you could think of it, first of all, in an easy way, that before I dive into some complicated problem, what are some of the natural demarcation points, a natural way of chopping the problem into up to smaller pieces? That's where some of your insight might come in. In some ways of cutting that to pieces might be mostly useless, other ways might present you with a lot more insight. And within there, what are the major possibilities? What are maybe some sub-possibilities? And in the same time, it gives you the possibility to understand this group of possibilities. It might be more probable. This one we don't really care about. This one is actually really interesting. This one we have some signal that might really that be the case. You will naturally be prioritizing those sub-areas which have higher probability, which are more important for your case. It gives you a level of clarity, focus. It helps you in prioritizing what you want to do, verify or do after that. Helps you in your resource allocation, and again, helps you in your team alignment and stakeholder buy-in. Because they will see it's not just a mess of random things, but these were all structured possibilities as if in a tree, and these were the hypotheses we came up with. This one appears to be more probable, this one is probably less so, therefore we start verifying or disproving them in that order. In that sense, brainstorming done right is the critical step in applying a strategic reason to creative output. It's transforming just some raw, random mess of ideas into actionable intelligence, ensuring that that effort is directly towards building the right product effectively and efficiently. I think one slide is missing, possibly. With that, what should be really the real core capabilities of a good product manager? I would like to go a little bit more detail in these items here. You need to have a deep understanding of the customer needs. You always have to advocate for the user. You have to have the insight. You are the product's conscience, the relentless voice in that room, which ensures that you build for someone, not just something. Without you, the product is a solution looking for a problem. And if you've been for any time around Silicon Valley, you've seen plenty of cases of solutions looking for problems. Second, you have to be a great communicator and storyteller to align teams and share the vision. You have to have the insight to create a shared understanding. And in that sense, you don't just communicate facts, you weave a narrative, you create a story which connects that vision and strategy and daily tasks. People don't really care about facts, they care about that story. Learn how to tell good stories. You have to be a structured thinker who can break down complex challenges. That some of the ideas we just talked about, which also gives you the insight that you will be the master deconstructor. which in that sense, that person who is really good in taking some big, complicated, hard understood, massive problem and can bring some clarity to it, and with that one some efficiency. With that, you also have to lead without authority, which is, again, a very fashionable expression nowadays. In fact, if you get a bit of experience in these previous parts, that's not that hard. It is surprisingly rare to find people, especially outside of product management, who can really internalize these aspects. If you can do this structured thinking, if you can figure out what the customer really wants, what the user journey really means, and you can put a story around it, chances are you can actually lead quite well without a real titular authority. You also need to be great at analyzing data to understand users and to measure your success. One of the first things I've learned working for way too many startups was, I don't know what the customer wants. Out of the 8 startups I worked for, at least in 5 of them, we built something which worked in about 7 of them. In at least 5 of those, we built it and almost nobody came. We built it for the wrong problem. We really missed the part of figuring out what they want and to analyze the data based on that. And you also have to have some technical fluency for at least 3 different reasons. You need to be able to communicate well with engineering. You have to have some sense of understanding what's possible. And you have to have that knowledge so that they take you seriously, that those people actually go to implement it. So based on that, what are really the different kinds of product managers that you find in what people like to call the Magnificent Seven, the Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla, and probably also some other companies. There are some, it's actually quite different real practical product managers in some of these companies. And if tomorrow you get a job offer to be a product manager, make sure you understand which one they mean and make sure you understand what their real expectations are. Because sometimes people use that term not exactly for the same reason. In the first one example, I would call out what I might call the front-end product manager, whose focus is the user experience, the design, the usability. These are the users input at the front door. They live and breathe the user journey. How many clicks does it take to do this? So what is understanding? They select the smallest interaction details. They translate those user needs and design visions into these product experiences and really working very intimately with design and user experience people. Some example companies for that would be Apple with the user-facing apps, Meta in a lot of their products, Shopify, Airbnb, Instagram probably. A different group, a part where I've actually spent a substantial part of my work was, which I would call the backend or platform product manager, whose focus is really much more about the infrastructure, API, scalability. These are the architects of that invisible foundation which makes our current world actually work. The users are either often other engineers or sometimes other companies. They make sure that the basic underlying infrastructure of the company works, or they are creating that in ways which actually are useful for their own engineers and possibly for other companies if they are serving them on the outside. They are the platform builders in other ways. They define the contracts, the APIs. They worry about reliability, performance, all those kind of things. The kind of companies you might, or parts of companies you might have in mind here would be AWS, of course, Google Cloud, Twilio, Meta with their internal platforms, Microsoft Azure, possibly. A slight, not so slight variation on that one would be what you might call the data or the AI product manager nowadays. Of course, it's super fashionable. And these are the people who think about how do we use those relatively newly much more developed AI features in a lot of solving a lot of different problems. They try to translate that cutting-edge research, which might be done either in their department or in the open source, and oftentimes big data sets, and how do you translate that into some useful product features or business outcomes. They think about model performance, model training, data quality, hopefully ethical implications, and explaining these AI concepts and solutions to other stakeholders. They are the algorithm architects. Example companies would be, of course, Meta, Netflix, OpenAI, DeepMind, and some other parts of Google actually use a lot of these features. A fourth group here would be sometimes which is called a growth product manager. And there's a lot of different variations here. Sometimes they might call them the director of VP of growth, a different way of people phrase that. A couple of my good friends have been in those kind of jobs. And their job in that sense is user acquisition, retention, A/B testing, and kind of how do they get the money out of those actual users. These are, you could think of them as the scientists of user behavior. They are quantitative, they use A/B testing, they look for different ways of acquiring users, they think about the user funnel, the notification strategy, optimizations across the stack of how do they optimize each part of the user funnel to have more conversions and repeat users and more stickiness. They really look at engagement and retention and all of those things. The typical companies here would be, again, Meta, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and a bunch of different consumer products of Google. A very different twist, which still should be mentioned here, is which people often call the TPM, the technical product manager. And you really have to be careful if somebody wants to hire you as a TPM, because they really mean different things here. Oftentimes in some of the other companies where you have one of those other PMs, and you could often imagine the TPM is somebody who is possibly working with them, who is more possibly closely working with the engineers to create, update, and communicate, organize the lists, which is like a super simplified way of doing what TPMs are doing. They oftentimes are more technical, but funny thing is not always. There are oftentimes cases when they themselves are not that super technical. They are just very well understanding and exercising how to run the mechanism of project management other times. That's very often their real engagement in a company. So again, there are different variations here of how much of the technical part they really get engaged in. And as a last but not least, I would really point out the hardware-related product managers. I did mention a few hardware pieces previously also, but once you really get into hardware, a lot of the real trade-offs and real optimizations are just so different that oftentimes you just need a totally different mindset to really well address that. And you could think of it here, Tesla, Apple, Nest, Amazon with the Echo devices and things like that. So you could think of it as that while these job titles may vary, these archetypes kind of represent the core challenges and focuses within large and complex tech companies, but sometimes also within smaller ones. Each of these roles require a kind of bit of a unique and a different viewpoint, and you do want to make sure you understand which of these ones a particular person is talking about, because just the word product manager doesn't always kind of describe it well. So as a summary, what is really product management? I would say the product management is the art of a purposeful and guided iteration. At its heart, the product management is a relentless pursuit of a singular critical goal to create, deliver, and capture value. And it means that diving deep to deeply understand the real customer needs, that problems, frustrations, and aspirations that exist in the world. It manifests those solutions by shipping great products which really make a difference. And you will not get it right the first time. You probably will not get most of it right the second time either. The world is a very dynamic place where customer needs are very nuanced, and these customers just tend to think different than you. And I know it's kind of very frustrating, but you really need to get your head around that. And technology and solutions are fluid, they change over time, and your understanding is imperfect. And attempting to build a perfect product the first time based purely on initial assumptions and doing it kind of in a secret is a recipe for disaster. So in that sense, the craft of product management is not just having the perfect vision to begin with, but establishing the processes and expertly navigating that iterative cycle. And this cycle is kind of fueled by some timely and effective feedback and correction as you go around there, and you test your assumptions, validate your understanding, and measure your impact, identify your issues, and course correct towards a target of creating, delivering, and capturing real value. And your product is really not just a sum of the features. It's the living result of your continuous learning loop. And in that sense, embrace the imperfection of your first step, trust the power of that next iteration and the iteration behind there, and let that customer reality guide you back to the core purpose. So with that, why is this profession great? Why you might want to think about doing that? It's great because you are at the nexus of understanding human problems and visioning solutions, guiding creation and seeing tangible impact in the world. You are a strategist, you are a builder and a leader, constantly challenged to learn, to adopt, and to bring meaningful value into existence. Is that art of navigating uncertainty with purpose, driven by the desire to make things better for a lot of people. With that, I would like to give it back to you and for the questions and answers.
Thank you, Zoltan. Yeah, so let's open it up for questions. Any questions? Yes.
Question. I sense some overlap in the definition and the explanation of the product manager, various roles and aspects with project management. And so could you clarify the distinction, please, between those two and
Yeah.
say why the product management? I mean, say more about that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and there is a lot of confusion about product management, project management, and then sometimes technical program or product management. So those three categories are confusing. You mentioned there is some overlap. So let me start with the overlap. Oftentimes, project managers and, as we said, program managers do execution. That the execution piece is basically part of both categories, product and project management. Project management basically is focusing though more on the execution side of the house. So I would say that the overlap pretty much stops here. There is some other overlaps, but the most overlap is around execution. What project managements don't do, they usually don't create a vision or a strategy. What project managers don't do, they don't go deep in customer needs. They get the customer needs from somewhere or from some doc, and then they get the roadmap, which is described on this slide, but basically they don't really spend time to understand the customer's needs, and they don't build the vision and the strategy. I would say communication is probably also an overlapping. I mean, there are different levels. Product managers use communication, as Zoltan also mentioned, in much more variety of ways, creating documents, creating structures, creating a shared understanding. Project managers are more focused on basically making sure that they track the progress, and if there are basically roadblocks, then they escalate. So communication, I would say, is also an overlapping area, and driving product success, in that sense, it's an overlapping area that there is a big part of execution in product success, but looking at metrics, looking and incorporating the user feedback, those are not something that project managers would do. That's definitely more in the product manager side. Did I answer your question?
Sort of. I mean, as a trained project manager, I've learned that communication and having the vision and manifesting the vision is a major part of project management also. And so clearly there's a distinction because it's sort of process versus outcome sort of orientation, but I think there's a significant amount of overlap, and how to integrate both functions in a given situation. I mean, if there's a company that is trying to develop a product, how would you incorporate both roles for maximum effectiveness?
Good question. Let me answer one of your earlier comments. So you mentioned as a project manager, you created vision. And I would answer to that there are different flavors of companies, even within the Bay Area. Oftentimes, product managers are glorified project managers, i.e. we just do project management and someone on the top tells us what to do, and then we just execute on that. In some other cases, project managers step into the role of creating vision, as you mentioned. But as a rule, with these big companies, and we are not talking about all the companies, so intentionally we put the list here. As a rule, with these companies, product manager does all the things what we described, and project managers, they don't do everything from there. Sure. So that I want to clarify that. Now, how would you make it, to your second question, how would you make a very good team or a process or a structure around this? As Zoltan mentioned, there are highly technical parts of the operations of these companies where you need to work very, very closely with engineers working on infrastructure, engineers working on all kinds of services, making sure that your launch processes are synced up, making sure that the privacy requirements are applied. So in those areas, having a skilled technical product manager or project manager, it's extremely, extremely important. And without those, the foundation of these companies might fall apart. So that's a very key aspect of project management. And the way I would create a structure for project managers, which includes project managers and product managers too, is to have the project managers focus on more the process-oriented, more the technically heavy, technically detailed, minutia, repetitive work, which is very, very important, but it basically requires a certain type of rigor, which I would say product managers don't always have, but project managers do have. So that's how we would create a structure. Any other questions?
There is a question online. For startups, is there a hard and fast rule for when to hire a professional product manager, especially when this competency doesn't really exist at the co-founder level?
You want to take that, or should I?
I have my opinions. Why don't you do the first iteration and I will try to add my part.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is when to hire a product manager. It is the answer can be broken into probably two parts. When does the co-founder think they need a product manager, and when would the product manager be happy? So that's what I would say, that with small companies, product management, CEO, co-founder roles are in one person. We saw Steve Jobs. He was playing all those roles. He didn't really require a product manager. As the company grows, though, as a co-founder or a CEO of a company, you start basically having too many duties, too many things to focus on. And at that point, it starts making sense to have someone on the ground which person is then can help you coordinate across the three areas which we described earlier here, between design or user experience, technology, and business. So when is that time? I don't necessarily know. I had a startup. We had about 20 people. We were very, very far from that. Me and my co-founder, I felt I can go another maybe 100 people before we need the first product manager. Maybe not 100, but definitely 50 to 60 more. So I would say probably you want to have, if you are a good founder or the founder who is deep in the details, which most founders are, I would think that it's probably above 100 people when you start thinking that you want to hire a product manager, but that's just my guess. It varies depending on the area, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, whether it's very technical focused, so it could vary. But there is no recipe. That's my high-level answer. Zoltán?
I would like to add to that one of the key words there was the word hire, which is a big distinguisher. I would argue that even before you were to hire that person, when you are just a little more than an idea in that proverbial garage, it is super to your advantage to have somebody who has at least some experience or some mindset in product management. Otherwise, the chances of creating the wrong product are immensely large. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to hire them. Like, is one of your founders somebody who has a decent experience in that one? Do they have somebody who is consulting with them quite a lot? It's not a coincidence that one of the best job titles to have to go to Sentier Road and get an investment is a product manager. So if I were to put that higher into a bit of parenthesis, and what is a time when your startup would need somebody with some serious thinking in product management, I would argue that possibly before you write your first line of code, or a little bit thinking about software, when you hire such a person, that's probably what you described.
And there are different thoughts on this, school of thoughts. So there are founders who really speak the language of the customer and technology. Steve Jobs was one of them, but Mark Zuckerberg is another one. Sergey from Google, they really understood the business, they understood the technology. In some cases, the founder is more technical. They doesn't necessarily understand that deeply the customer. At that point, probably you want to expedite having a product manager on board. So yeah, there is no secret sauce, no recipe. Any other questions?
There is another question online. What do you enjoy most about being a product manager?
So there are a couple of things I enjoy personally, and I would love to hear your. Actually, where do you want to go first now?
Personally, I'm a learning junkie. And in that sense, one of the parts which I enjoy most is really figuring out what people want. Having worked for 8 startups and most of them crashed and burned because what we built, almost nobody cared. That really put me into that sense of, so I need to figure out what people actually want. So in that sense, one of my biggest satisfaction comes from figuring that out and as a result of that, making a difference by hopefully getting something created which they actually want to use at the end. That's at least for me.
I guess I have a follow-on question to that. So you mentioned the ones that crash and burn, but what was the difference in the ones that didn't, right? So, and like, what was the role of the product managers in the sort of success stories that you have, or was it just the pressure of the market or luck or timing?
It was the combination of the founders having some product management sense. Not exactly how much, that's kind of up for discussion, and probably some luck.
So for me, to answer this question, it's probably helpful to mention like what phase of the product I like focusing on. Some of you in the room might have heard that there are products in stage of 0 to 1, which means that very, very early stage. There is the 1 to 10 where you kind of started to find product market fit, but you're not quite there yet. And then 10 to 100 where you already found product market fit and you are scaling. So I feel the most comfortable in the 0 to 1 area, the very early stage. And probably goes back to when I had a startup and co-founder. So early stage is my sweet spot. And in that role, the most I enjoy is basically building, launching, and iterating. That process is fascinating. And I really love the fact that whenever, especially early stages, you launch a lot, you fail, but you quickly can iterate and then quickly learn. With every launch, you learn something new. So that process I like. The other big part I like is that throughout product management, it's very important to understand the need of the customer. But in this early stage, it's absolutely critical to understand, otherwise you will never reach product market fit. So that process of talking with your customer, learning from day one, by either talking with them or just launching, getting the results, iterating, launching again, getting the result, iterating, that's just, I really like. So that's for me.
I would like to add to that, the person who created Lean Canvas, which is a particular way of a very summarized way of how you plan your whole value chain. He recently had a very interesting video on YouTube. So what I'm going to say is totally from him. He was talking about that a lot of people think about the build, demo, sell kind of cycle. First I need to build this thing and I need to demo it and I need to sell it. And yes, sometimes, maybe, or maybe not so often. And he was very much arguing that no, it should be the demo and build and sell, and occasionally even demo, sell, build. But some combination of at least first you demo it, doesn't need to be working, obviously. Sometimes it's just describing how you think that thing would be working and what kind of problem that would be solving, and get feedback from that potential customer. And then oftentimes you need to build at least some version of that to actually be able to really sell it, though that's not 100% of the cases. And he was strongly arguing, I think with some merit, that your chances of building something which actually has a real need for it are an order of magnitude better than with the old build, demo, sell cycle.
I have a question about early product development and product management at an early stage. So when looking at product requirements and potential implementations or technical solutions for those requirements, how do you balance between a customer request coming from the top and technical solutions proposed by the engineering team at the bottom? Because what I've seen so far is that if you listen to the customer too much, you might have a happy customer, but a horrible solution. If you build a technical solution from the ground up, you have an excellent device, an excellent implementation, which nobody wants. Where do you draw the line? How do you balance?
That's a great question. Could you elaborate on the first use case? So you mentioned that if you build it for the customer, then the solution is, can you elaborate?
So if you go from the top down, so the customer is at the top and the engineering team is at the bottom. The customer has a certain scenario in mind, what they think they want, but what they think they want is not always what's best. Think about the 2-year-old at home. You ask him, what do you want for lunch? The answer is going to be candy or chocolate, right? But that's, yeah, it will keep you alive, but that's probably not the best solution. And if you go from the ground up, you might, if you look at technical aspects, the engineering team always knows best what we are able to do in a given amount of time with the resources available to us. But this might not immediately be accessible to the customer and their plans.
Makes sense. I like how you framed the first use case that basically ask for something that they might not really want. That actually goes back to the example, I think, what Zoltan was telling about the horse 2.0. Basically, they, in that scenario, thought that they need to build a better, faster horse. But basically the real need was that they wanted to have a fundamentally better transportation method, which is not the horse, but the car in this example. So this is me answering your question in a way that you don't only listen to the symptoms what the customers are telling you, but you need to talk to enough customers so that you understand the underlying problem, not the symptoms, but the underlying problem. The only way you get that is you get direct contact with the customer. So while I agree with you that customers could mislead you, I do believe that if you talk to enough customers, you do enough research, or you look at enough data, at some point you have a very good understanding of what the underlying customer need is rather than the symptoms. So I would still start with the customer, and I would put all those filters and caveats on it. What engineers might want to build, definitely it's important, but I would definitely not start with engineers to design the solution. That's a no-go for me. Does that answer your question? So I would definitely understand.
I have a small follow-up. What if you have a large contract with a single customer and your field of view is going to be a little limited?
Right, and then is your question that I might not have the resources to build what they are asking for? Is that the...
How do you decide whether it's the right solution or not? you yourself propose?
Well, I think what I'm saying is you need to understand what the customer wants instead of you proposing a solution.
Do you often go to other resources in a scenario like that? I have a customer who's expressing a need. I don't know if there's a deeper solution that needs to be provided for. Who else do you go to? Can you then go to other industry experts and to try to understand the nature of the customer problem so that you can develop the real solution that will solve their problem and they will like?
You can jump in.
Sometimes. I would like to add to the case when, just from putting aside that I'm a bigger company with one humongous customer. Let's put that aside just for a moment. I would like to talk about, I've seen it multiple times, the example of smaller software houses who had some particular domain expertise, in some cases trading systems, in other cases a bit different things, who were attempting to build up hopefully a larger business by, let's just first try to do this very special thing for one or maybe two customers, and let's generalize from that one. And unless you have a very, very strong organizational ability to resist those whims and the weird ideas of the customer, it almost never works. It almost never gets to the point that you can just configure your system. It almost always ends up being customized, in which case you will, in the best case, become a glorified consulting shop. That is for the cases when you start from a small and you attempt to grow larger. In a different case, if we are talking about already a larger company and the customer is asking for something very, very specific, at that point, I would argue a lot has to do with the real de facto state of power between the customer and the company, not just kind of who pays, because the customer usually pays at the end, but what is the customer's real trust in the solutions of the company or the ways the company might want to solve the customer's particular problem. And here it depends on so many things, the industry, the particular way that company is being run, talking about the customer versus how that your company is being run, who's trying to give them some service or some product. The real power dynamics makes a tremendous difference there. It's very, very hard to generalize at that point. We can obviously say what would be a desirable way of doing that. That is very often not decided by either technical or even some more logical merits, but really how the real power flows.
Okay.
So just to build a little bit more on that, on the power dynamics, if this customer A is the only customer in the space, or they pay you a shitload of money, like billions of dollars, so basically they will generate 20% of your yearly revenue, you're probably gonna go and then customize it, and then you will hope that you can sell that custom solution to someone else too. You definitely want to build it in a way that sometimes later down the road you can sell it to someone else too, but you would probably build it. So that's the power dynamics. If there are multiple smaller customers and you are one big vendor for those smaller customers, then you definitely have some leverage, and then you don't have to it. But I would still listen to what the customer wants, and I would start there. I think your original framing was top customer, bottom engineer. Definitely would start with the customer and then start there and see if it makes sense for us or not. But I would start there.
And realize that for some players, they play their game a little bit differently, that they do, which might even call malicious compliance with a very, very large, sometimes single, sometimes just two customers. They do exactly what they want, and they know very well that in half a year, they will be getting another contract for 400 million because it needs to be customized a bit differently.
That's
can be quite dirty.
Source of revenue.
Can be quite dirty.
Could you talk a little more about the differences between software and hardware? Specifically, I want to know about what does a hardware product manager do differently?
I am not very well positioned for that. Not sure, Zoltan, if you have any hardware experience.
Only very marginally, so I would probably not be the best person. What I can say is the reflexes of what are the iteration cycles what are the actual amount of money risked for going for particular solutions are usually much larger, both the cycle time and the money, which makes for different solution patterns, but that's about the limit of my understanding there.
I had a question for you personal. What was your startup?
It was a marketplace to connect families with elder care providers, in-home care providers. It's a huge market globally. In the US too, the population is getting older and older, and families need in-home caregivers. And it's very, very challenging to find those caregivers online. Usually you go to like traditional caregiving homes and try to find those caregivers, and it's pretty opaque. So we wanted to create a solution for that. It didn't work out. So this was about 10 years ago. People were not using solutions online. So we thought it's a great opportunity to build something online, but they were not using it online because they were not comfortable with online. So, and they had other sources too. So I think it went down to the fact, I have to admit that we didn't intimately understand not only where the customers are not on, but also we didn't understand the fact that customers who look for caregivers might not even, they don't have the willingness to basically go online because they are not comfortable with that source, or they have other avenues. So that very intimate understanding of the customer, I think it was missing. So that was one area. We could overcome that with putting salespeople on the ground and then going to elder care homes and then selling to them. That changed the cost structure. So all of a sudden it hits the monetary part of the product. There were some others which wasn't our fault though, is the regulations. You're dealing with human folks, and everyone in our marketplace was a subcontractor. So it was like an Uber for caregiving. But there are very strong regulatory bodies who at some point told that you cannot have caregivers as subcontractors. So we kind of felt it's going to come our way, and I'm going to say 1 more minute about this. So then we decided to shut down the company. It was a long process, we shut it down, and then 1 month later, we had two main competitors. One of them raised a $10 million round, and the other one they raised a $20 million round. So that was one of my worst weeks ever, because we thought that we are dumb and we are not persistent enough, and we should have kept going. Then 1 year later, after they raised, these regulatory changes kicked in, which we already kind of saw that they might kick in. One of them went out of business. The other one converted to a traditional caregiving agency with limited profits. So what ended up happening, they got that funding, they burned themselves and that money for another year, and then they ended up pretty much where we ended up 1 year before. So, yeah.
And now you have AI companions, right?
Yeah.
For the elderly. Anyway, I just want to make a quick comment. So I spent 45 years practicing law, and one of my specialties was doing those H visas, which probably got some of you here in the Valley. And I've represented many startups to Oracle, the various companies. And one thing I learned, I'm not an engineer, I'm just a lawyer, but one thing I learned going to Frank's comment is that I always looked at the core function as opposed to the title. So there's a discrepancy with the titles and the functions, etc. How companies depends on where you are in your development, etc. So that's basically, I think, but I see lots of overlap. So that's just my comment. I really enjoyed this.
I do have a question for the crowd. In general, for most of the companies in the Valley, or any other tech companies, what do you guys think, what is most important, or what is more important, vision and strategy or execution? Which one leads to more success? Which one is key to success? It's a very debatable area, but I have a strong opinion on that, so I just...
So did you talk about the size of the company?
Doesn't matter the size.
That's an opinion, but okay.
In this question, it's like
Okay.
long-term success, 0 to 10 years, 0 to 20 years.
Vision,
Oh,
Vision.
Of course.
You mentioned it
In
on
that
one of the
sense.
slides.
vision.
It depends on the phase of the company. Right, so
Tell me more.
it's very simple. So if you do not have the vision at the beginning, which you can sell to investors, then you don't go anywhere. Once you get the money and you don't have the execution, so if you can't execute, then you just burn your investments and that's it, and you are out of the game. So that's what I say, that it depends on the phase of your company. That's what I think.
That to
Also,
some extent is true. I think there is
it
a
also
staggering startups who they pivot, they change their vision. They start out with something and they pivot to
Yeah,
something.
it's typical.
So vision is important to your point to sell it, but it's not that what basically will define whether you're successful long-term or not in most cases. I will tell you in which cases it's probably not true, but I would argue execution is more important. But
That's what I was about to say.
the certain type of execution though, and that type of execution which basically is able to iterate extremely fast. Why? Because with every iteration cycle, you learn something new about the customer and you can change, you can pivot, you can change the direction. Those companies are very, very successful, which are able to quickly deploy, learn, and then change their direction if needed based on what they learn about the real need of the company. So that's, I think it's a general rule. There is a ton of debate around this. So now there are exceptions. Exceptions are those products which are game-changing products. So this product is game-changing. This, you definitely have to have a great execution, but Steve Jobs' vision, it was in this product. So without this, you would have not come up.
You know, it's not his vision. So these things existed before. The only thing he put on, the only one thing which is really made it fly is that you can use your fingers. The earlier stuff had styluses, and that was
Well, but he had a vision that that's with stylus didn't pick up, and this one didn't pick up. So he had something.
that was the only thing, plus the infrastructure, the ecosystem around it.
Well, I would say that if you say someone is close to the biggest visionaries in the business, I would say Steve is one of the closest.
That's true.
And then there are some others who are more like grinders or iterative ones. Both of them are successful, but it's much, I would say, I would also add one more thing. As a regular human being, it's much easier to basically have a good iteration cycle than have that perfect vision, which will take you to build.
But I tell you one example, so let's debate it a bit. So when it comes to these smartphones, this form factor, in 2001, we had it at Ericsson Research, maybe you remember. It had a Wi-Fi card in it. You can make phone calls, video calls, web browser, anything on it, right? And it was in 2001. Okay, what was the point around? Nobody had the idea that, okay, how it will be used by the masses. And that's a visionary thing. So we probably had the execution. We pitched it to the Japanese, to Docomo. They said, okay, not that bad, whatever. It was in 2001, and actually nothing happened afterwards. That was a demo vehicle to demonstrate a wireless network, not the device itself. It was just a spin-off that we realized that was a compact iPad. We could put a Linux on it, could put a Wi-Fi card into it. We could fire up a lot of applications on it just for fun, just to show that it works. But we had no idea that, okay, the ecosystem around it, what Steve Jobs created, probably that's
No, you're right. And that's one of the exceptions.
I'd like to add two things to it. One is, one could argue that Apple's approach of trying to make it smooth and easy to use for the masses made a big difference. Number two, from a different area, the single most important criteria for Y Combinator to invest in a small company is not how good their idea or how good their vision is. Do they have a reasonably sized team with people who they believe can quickly execute and are able to iterate? By their own admission, that is their biggest criteria for investment.
That's 100% true.
Is this really true?
At least appears to be, as far as I understand.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Thank you, Chuba.
Thank you, Zoltan.